So what was your perception?
Fear.
Fear. Good. Anybody else?
Trying to protect my husband from it, who was very ill anyway.
Okay, that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about, is the fear. And what I want you to do is take all of these models that you've seen, and I want you to apply them to our society and ourselves, and try and picture how we're going to be moving forward as a society. So now I can get rid of that microphone. Green. Got it. Okay. Not working. Ah. Okay. I pressed the red and that showed up. But anyway, so these are some of the questions that you might want to ask about what happened during COVID. And before I even, you know what? It's not working for me. I just have a little thing here. Oh, I got it. Okay. There you go. Got it. So first, before we even start, I'd like to talk a little bit about magical thinking and critical thinking. So magical thinking has been used within the organization here quite consistently to discuss how cult members think about something. And I'd like to say that this is a total misnomer, because it doesn't relate to how magicians think. It's really describing a sort of fantasy way of thinking that's not based in reality, where magicians are totally based in reality. And the amount of work that they have to do to manipulate your thoughts and your actions and your behaviors is incredibly involved in critical thinking. And so I just want to get that out of the way. And I may use the term a couple of times here, ironically, just to maybe put it in. So here we have stuff that we're exposed to every day. Note the isolated person. They've got all sorts of things going on with them. Oh, it's so bad. And him too starts again. Oh, sharp pieces of glass. Talk about magical thinking. And then all of a sudden you take whatever it is and you become free. It's wonderful. We love it. Triumphant, it's called. So when I'm talking about enlarging your perspectives, does anybody know how many triangles are there? Anybody hazard a guess? Come on, hurry up. I only got a half hour. How many? And he's right. Give that guy a cigar. Okay. Now we take one away. How many are there? Now, so 2 from 5 is what? So do the other 3 exist? They don't exist unless you enlarge your context and are able to see these things. What about here? How many? 5, and you take one away, and there's 1. But they exist. Even though you're not seeing them, they exist. So I happen to be lucky. I had gone down, I wasn't lucky. I went down to Australia to take care of a friend's estate who had passed away at the very beginning of COVID in February. He did not pass away from COVID. And while I was there doing that, I ended up having to be there so long that I got stuck and couldn't travel for 6 weeks. So I had a sort of unique perspective there of viewing COVID from an isolated sort of rural environment. And so let me tell you, it was a great place to get stuck. And I actually had a lot of fun disobeying you know, the orders to stay off the beach. And so right in the beginning, this is what was on the Sky TV in Australia. And this was happening, I didn't want to do all of the examples, but this was happening in the beginning all over the world. And I'm going to tell you what my perspective is and what was unusual for me. What was unusual for me was that in 3 weeks, the behavior globally was changed drastically. Over 90 countries locked down within an incredible short amount of time. That's totally mind-boggling if you actually stop to think about it. But most of this is out of your mind because they don't want it to be in your mind. The same way like I didn't want it to be in your mind that I wasn't speaking into a microphone. And then we had this guy who didn't help. You want to talk about listening to authority? Whatever you think of him, he was the authority. He was the authority. He was president of the United States. You don't get much higher authority than that. And then you had the mixed messaging, which in the beginning, it's going to be fine, down, not up, it'll disappear. And then as it won't, oh, it's a hoax from them. And in the end, like usually he did, you know, oh, it's a national emergency. I always knew. And those are actual quotes. Meanwhile, we're presented with all these pictures of death. You want to know why you felt fear? You want to know why you felt fear? Is because you're constantly shown these pictures of death, because there's nothing that brings fear to people more than death. And we were bombarded with them constantly. And this was really happening. And then we had the usual, as it moved on, we had the items moved out of the background where they usually were and put up in the side next to the numbers that we're all supposed to look at and follow every day. For some reason, we all knew how many beds were available, how many, we didn't know anything about anybody who recovered. Nothing, absolutely nothing out there. And the other thing that didn't happen is they didn't explain how this was a virus that didn't affect everybody, though that was the way it was portrayed. All of this constant jargon and trying to, everything that you had on every one of your checklists, I'd like you to take your checklist and see how many things that happened with COVID could be applied to all of those models, every one. But it didn't seem like there were any red flags except for some. You know, the red flags were not there. It was all green flag, be together. And then it turned global. All of the messaging started to be global, that you're now part of a global movement that has to save the world from this virus. Now, the World Health Organization was the main organization which was on top of handling how the COVID crisis was responded to. As we know now, we did not get accurate information for a variety of reasons. You know, one of the major ones is that China happens to hold sway and influence over the World Health Organization. Now, because of President Trump, there was this enormous backlash of anti-China rhetoric because of the othering of China. And people just fall into that because it's basically a monkey see, monkey do situation. And they suffered greatly because of it. I'm showing you all these images because probably they're outside of your perception. Now, to kind of remind you all of what we went through, it's very easy to put this stuff, way back in the rearview mirror and not consider it. Then you had the protests. The protests were, in fact, from people who didn't agree to the fact that they were being locked down for whatever reason. And all of this stuff was taken over by opportunists, whether it's opportunists for the right or left. Everyone jumped on the bandwagon because basically a good crisis can't be missed. And that part of it also, part of what created this division is, I don't know if a lot of you are aware of it, but all of the conspiracy stuff, all of the anti-vax stuff, all of that, there's a saying in propaganda. Propaganda is meant to occur over a generation. When it's applied in its original meaning, it's generational. You want to change a generation and the way that they think. Because of the technology, this has been moved forward where you're able to change people in a considerably less amount of time and change their behavior. Now, I'm not looking at it as mind control or thought reform. I think it's simply operant conditioning. And so then there's the message that we got about where it came from. Okay, it was the market. Couldn't have been a lab leak. Anybody who thinks it's a lab leak is a conspiracy theorist. And I'm not going to go on much about that, but the othering of people who stood up and wanted to say something about it, regardless if they were in the same sort of groups, the medical community, the mental health community. And the terrible thing about this is that both the WHO, the NIH have all done studies prior to this on COVID simulations of what happens. And each one of those studies that they have ever done comes down on not having a lockdown, not having masks, that they're not, helpful, unless it's, you're there close with somebody. And that none of the measured lockdowns, taking kids out of school. Why does a kid have to stay 6 feet away from another kid? And these were our children. And so we allow these things because the authority that we trust and want to help. And I'm a kid of the counterculture, so my whole thing is, you don't trust authority. They always have to be questions, regardless. It doesn't hurt to question authority. So we got through the lab leak, and just look at this. These are the biolabs around the world. So just think for a second. The Wuhan lab is 10 miles from the seafood market that they say happened. We have 200,000 million square miles on the earth. So what are the chances of the virus coming from a place where they're working on that virus? They're working on gain of function, which means how do you make the virus more contagious so they can explore how to defend against it. So that's magical thinking, okay? From the beginning, I thought that. It just didn't make sense. That's the gain of function. That's what they do. And, most of this is not science. It's driven by the military industrial complex. So I finally got to fly out of Australia, and I got on the plane. There were 5 people on the plane, and I had to go through all this stuff to get out, temperature checks, this and stuff. I land in Los Angeles, and nobody's there. Nobody at the airport. The customs people were like, yeah, they weren't looking at anybody. They was, don't get near me. You're coming from some sort of foreign place. I mean, it was so uncanny. Glad to be back. And then of course, having the city shut down in this dystopian apocalyptic way all over, and the people who are homeless getting thrown out of shelters. And this was global. This was all around the globe. This is not just in one place, even though we're sitting in one place, we feel like it's in one place. But this is what happened globally. And to achieve that sort of control on people's behavior should bring pause about how it was done. And do we want it to happen again? We were driven to all sorts of strange behaviors like hoarding and so on. And we also developed the lingo, which I have to read because I couldn't memorize all of it. We developed the lingo, which was certainly COVID-19, coronavirus, pandemic, lockdown, quarantine, social distancing, isolation, contract tracing, PPE, remote work, Zoom fatigue, flattening the curve, stop the spread, essential worker, asymptomatic, vaccine hesitancy, herd immunity, long COVID, brain fog, vaccine passport, variants of concern, super spreader. Oh. Vaccine nationalism, global health governance, travel bans, economic stimulus packages, contact tracing apps, vaccine diplomacy, lockdown protests, health disparities, emergency powers, health information, disinformation campaigns, vaccine, that's it, public health measures, and health surveillance. Then there was the politically motivated, which is the red state, blue state virus, scamdemic, freedom flu, Democrat versus Republic virus, quarantine and chill, quarantine team, Dr. Google, Kofifi, Trump-demic. And then you could be a pharma bro or an armchair epidemiologist, pandemic, jabberoni, the slang term for people who mock or belittle somebody who's perceived as foolish, clueless about the pandemic, Dr. Doom, herd mentality, quarantine fatigue, Clorox cocktail. It goes on and on, but it's too much to go through. But what I'm trying to say, loading the language, and what these things do to us and our children. When I got to Los Angeles, both my daughter and my granddaughter, I quarantined, that's what you're supposed to do, didn't want to come to see me. And, I finally talked them into coming and seeing me. And then when I did, it was like, okay, can't get close. And I was horrified. I was not only horrified, but it was just so terrible to see how desperate my then 16-year-old granddaughter felt, because she thought she was going to, hurt me. And so it took an hour before I could say, come on, it's okay. We'll do backward hugs, okay? And I know this thing was not just happening to me. I know this was not a unique experience to me. Then the protests got more, because people, when they start to feel oppressed, start to protest. And as long as they're able to protest, that's how we work out things in a democratic system. It didn't always work out that way. There were countries where if you were in an authoritarian regime, they, took this to the max, to the point of, I think it was in the Philippines, President Duarte had shoot to kill orders for people that violated quarantine. Millions and millions of people were arrested or cited for violating the rules. And this included people who were taking their kids to a park where nobody else was there. They dumped sand in places in LA in all the skateboard parks, so the kids couldn't go out and skateboard. So your isolation and control was enormous. The effect on learning in school is, we all are becoming more and more aware on how this affected our young people and the mental health, as was spoken to in some of the previous sessions. The thing that happened besides this is that everyone was at a screen, and everyone was at a screen for way longer than they have ever been. So what it enabled to happen was AI was already moving along. And AI works on you using it. You're teaching it. You're helping it. You're making it react more so that you can interact with it and feel comfortable doing so, because it's like interacting with another person. By the way, this was all done by ChatGPT. Thank you. Took about 15 seconds. And so this was a device that was then also, everybody exploits something when there's money involved. And I like to say, everybody has a greed gland. In the financial world, that's what they talk about, what drives everything, the greed gland. If you can get somebody's greed gland, you can get them interested in an IPO or whatever. The thing is, there's a greed gland for everything. There's a greed gland for spirituality. There's a greed for wanting to improve your life and become more. Sometimes when you hear the word abundance, maybe in your mind, you might replace it with greed and see if it fits. Because abundance doesn't always mean, what is it? Are you being greedy or not? So this moved us into a whole new era, because the amount of data that was collected during the 2 years of COVID drove AI exponentially to where they thought it was going to take 5 years to reach some point. We arrived at it in a year. So ultimately, we have this mixture, whether we like it or not, where we have this merging of us and technology, whether we want to admit it or not. Put our heads in the sands. This is happening, and it's not like it's going to happen. It is happening. Now you're hearing a narrative about how AI is scary, right? Everybody's got the Terminator model of what's going to go on, right? And in a way, it might be scary if you project, way out to 50 years or something, or when the technology actually becomes sentient. And is that a good idea, that we should have this sentient technology? But for now, the danger is not that. The danger are the humans that use it and how they can use it, just even as it stands now. It doesn't have to get any worse. And what happens I get back to all those conspiracy theories and everything else, that most of the stuff that was on the internet and the social media, I'm saying 50 to 75%, were sponsored by state actors from other countries. So you may have a cult doing something and projecting some sort of information. And in the new lexicon, the word is amplifaganda, especially for foreign activity. Because what they do is they come in, they don't have to create their own propaganda campaign. It's created for them because we live in a free country and everybody's able to express their views how they want, and they amplify it. And they amplify it to the point that the public then starts to go, oh, we can't do this. Google, save us. Oh, monitor that. Tell us what's good. Tell us what's bad. And that's the purpose of it, is to create this chaos that, you don't know what's happening, and to keep you on an uneven footing all the time. Now we get to another point. So basically, even in the pandemic, Okay, the virus and warp speed was led by not the National Institute of Health. It was led by the military, headed, the NSA was at top, and then it was the Pentagon, and then it went down. Because these are the people who do that sort of research and have all the knowledge about it. And sometimes this stuff is right in front of us. And anybody think they have good observational skills? Come on, we're all here. You guys are supposed to be. Come on. One hand. Okay, good. And you're elected. You're elected. I'm going to give you my very, very expensive watch. Watch it, watch. No, I'm just kidding. And I want you to hold it and look at it.
Right.
Okay, I want you to examine the watch face, and then I'll ask you a few questions about it. And I'm willing to bet that you'll be incorrect. Done? Okay,
Might read the bank brand.
not necessary. It's expensive.
Okay.
Okay. So now I'll ask you some questions about it. Was the watch face alphanumeric or Roman numerals? And what was the symbol for number one?
It's just a
Okay. And number two? And number three?
freelance.
And number four?
IV.
Okay. You going on the riverboat cruise?
Yeah.
I think you're gonna buy me a drink.
Very possibly.
Okay.
Okay, it was 4-1.
Right.
Fair enough.
Okay. So even when you look at something that happens to be, it's not a trick watch. All watches are like this, and all Roman numeral clocks are like this, so you don't get confused if you're looking at them between the 5 and the 6, right? But we all make assumptions, and we base our answers and how we view things on our assumptions. So how do we test we should always be testing our assumptions, whether we're assuming it from statistics or whatever it is. I don't trust any statistics I didn't make up myself. So this is from 2020. So the government has decided now that instead of having 5 groups of warfare, which would be land, air, sea, cyber, and space, that there's a new place of warfare, and it's cognitive warfare, where the strict objective is to manipulate people's perceptions through many different means. And also, I mean, there's some, arguably supposedly beneficial aspects, which is to make the super soldier, so you maintain your hegemonic powers around the world. And I have a lot of this stuff is in the reference sheet if you want to dig through it and kind of read what's happening. It's sort of without maintaining some of the stuff that exists and is happening and is not conspiracy theory and is, just to know. Not that you have to get upset and jump up and down and go out and protest, but you have to get some of this stuff in your head just so you can attempt to wrap your head around it. It's the technology moves so fast. Moore's law is it doubles every 18 months. The technology. So when you look at that and project where it's going, it gives you an idea of how lost we're all going to be unless we're, staying right on it every second, and that happens to be our field. And we should also think about what our responsibility is. because we all use this technology. It's integral to us every day. We can't survive without it. So do we have a responsibility? Do we think about it at all? Does anybody know what that is? That there is cobalt. Cobalt has to go into everybody's phone. They found that cobalt makes your battery not heat up as much. And so it's integral part. And since everybody's gone with a green economy and let's go green and energy free, now all the countries have decided that we all have to have electric cars by a certain time, which created a gold rush for cobalt. Cobalt comes from a 500 square mile area in the Congo in Africa. And that's 80% of the world's supply of cobalt. And because it's in the Congo, it's corrupt government, they lease out the land to whoever can pay to mine the cobalt, which has been China, and China takes care of 80% of the cobalt in the Congo. So they control that supply. Now they do this with, big machinery and stuff, but because when they lease the land, they take over people, indigenous people who were living there, they have nothing to do. They have no way to live. They have no place to live, no nothing. They are forced to go and pick through with their hands and rebar to break the cobalt and mine the cobalt. These are children. They go down in mines that are not supported with anything. Every week there's a collapse of a mine that kills multiple children. And we're talking tens of thousands of people involved in this. They mine the big pieces, bring it up, and then the children and the women break it up into smaller pieces and bag it and then carry it. This is what we're looking at. And this is just one mine. There are hundreds of mines there. And this is happening because we have to support it. So I'm not saying take your cell phones, flush them down the toilet. I'm just saying somewhere in our minds, we have to have a responsibility for the technology to whatever degree you can. I'm not even putting an amount on it. It's just to whatever degree you can. That's it. I hope I've left time for questions.